Colleagues, good afternoon. Can you just confirm for me that you're hearing me well?
Hearing.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Excellent, colleagues. Thanks for that. Dr. Andre Coy, Associate Dean for External Engagement and Strategic Partnerships, Faculty of Science and Technology, the University of the West Indies Mona campus, and the Dean's representative this afternoon. Dr. Mohamed Nagdi, Executive Director, Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCREEE. Ms. Ina Divisa, Head of Program, supporting the implementation of NDCs, that is, nationally determined contributions in the Caribbean, transforming the transport and energy sector towards a low carbon and climate resilient future NDC tech. Our presenters, Mr. Giovanni Bocco, Project Manager Engineer at the CCREEE, and Mr. Arturo Steinvorth Alvarez, Crusoe Foundation, Costa Rica, other members of the UWI Mona team, CCREEE and GIZ teams, consortium members, members of the Project Steering Committee of the NDC Tech. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's great to see you, ladies and gentlemen, at this webinar where we're going to be exploring EV adoption in the Caribbean, tracking momentum. This webinar forms part of the series dubbed the Caribbean E-Mobility Dialogues, knowledge exchange in support of achieving NDCs in transport. The webinar today is being co-hosted by the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCREEE, and the University of the West Indies Mona campus, with support from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, BMWE, via their International Climate Initiative and in cooperation with GIZ. Ladies and gentlemen, our aim this afternoon is really to explore how we advance the Caribbean's e-mobility agenda. We're going to be looking at adoption trends, validating regional positions on interoperability, and just collectively looking at how we sustain the transition through collaboration, training, and financing. This afternoon, we host our activities under the program supporting the implementation of NDCs in the Caribbean, transforming the transport and energy sectors towards a low carbon and climate resilient future. We call that NDC Tech for short. Again, the funding is through BMWE and GIZ, and as a region, we thank the funders for this kind of support of the region. I am Tannecia Stephenson. I'm Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Science and Technology at the UWI Mona, and I'm co-lead of Output 2 that looks at capacity building for transformative action. This component, colleagues, I'll only say, has been engaging over 500 participants to date across 13 Caribbean countries and the USA and UK through in-person training, online courses, workshops, and importantly, curriculum development. That means we can sustain these activities beyond this program. Again, colleagues, welcome. I'm going to hand the floor to our partner institutions. We're going to start with greetings from Dr. Andre Coy, our Associate Dean for External Engagement, who this afternoon is representing our Dean. Sir Coy?
Thank you, Prof. Stephenson. Good afternoon, everyone. All the protocols have been observed, and it's my great pleasure to bring greetings on behalf of Professor Michael Taylor, the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at the UWI Mona. The faculty is delighted once again to partner with CCREEE and our regional and international collaborators in advancing the Caribbean's electric mobility agenda. Today's webinar, EV Adoption in the Caribbean, Tracking Momentum, comes at a crucial juncture in our region's pursuit of sustainable low-carbon futures. As part of the Caribbean's e-mobility dialogues, this series underscores our shared commitment to transforming transport systems as a key pillar in achieving the nationally determined contributions of Caribbean states. We join you in recognizing the importance of this dialogue, not just as a space for knowledge exchange, but as a mechanism for action, for validating regional positions, for sharing experiences, and building the technical and institutional capacity that will sustain this transition. We also take this opportunity to acknowledge with gratitude the support of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy and our partners at GIZ. Your vision and investment continue to make these important regional efforts possible. The University of the West Indies, Mona, through the Faculty of Science and Technology, is proud to lead Output 2 of the BMW IKI and GIZ funded program, supporting the implementation of NDCs in the Caribbean, transforming the transport and energy sectors toward a low carbon and climate resilient future. Our focus under this output is capacity building, ensuring that the region develops the skills, knowledge, and resources required to drive sustainable transportation. Since 2023, we have achieved several key milestones. We've conducted a comprehensive needs assessment to identify university, professional, and vocational courses required to support e-mobility across road and marine contexts in the Caribbean. We've developed 2 university-level courses, the Electric Mobility, Fundamentals of EV Technologies, and the Dynamics, Safety, and Economics of EV Technologies. We've also designed and delivered teacher training curricula in e-mobility, contributing to the continuous review and modernization of regional examination syllabi. We've conducted EV training sessions in St. Lucia, Belize, Jamaica, and Suriname, covering both technical and economic dimensions. We've already delivered 3 iterations of our 6-week self-paced online course, An Introduction to EV Technologies for Teachers. We've procured key infrastructure for supporting teaching and research in 2 locations across the Caribbean. Through partnerships with Canta and regional TVET institutions, we developed levels 3 and 4 occupational standards for electric vehicles and hosted 4 Train the Trainers workshops in Belize, Grenada, St. Lucia, and Jamaica. We've formed strategic partnerships with Anton Beckham University in Suriname for the delivery of workshops and the adoption of one of our university courses. These accomplishments represent significant strides in building the human capacity that will sustain the region's e-mobility transition. Importantly, they demonstrate the power of collaboration among universities, governments, industry partners, and international agencies that will transform knowledge into action. We look forward to continuing these efforts through mid-2026, to expanding our reach, refining our offerings, and deepening our partnerships as we work to build a resilient and low-carbon transportation sector for the Caribbean. As we convene today to explore EV adoption trends and to track the momentum of this adoption, let us remain guided by a shared vision: a Caribbean that is energy secure, environmentally responsible, and globally competitive. The university stands ready as a regional university to support this transformation through our research, through training, and through innovation. Together, we can ensure that electric mobility becomes not just a policy aspiration, but a lived reality across our islands. Thank you, and best wishes for a productive and insightful webinar.
Thank you so much, Sir Coy. Colleagues, we're going to move to Dr. Mohamed Nagdi, Executive Director, Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Sir Nagdi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sir Coy. Protocols haven't been observed. Good afternoon, colleagues and partners. On behalf of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, I warmly welcome you to the first session in our Caribbean E-Mobility Dialogue Series with the University of the West Indies. Today, we are tracking the momentum of the electric vehicle adoption across the region, which is a critical discussion for advancing our transport commitments under our nationally determined contributions. So why is e-mobility so important, and why does it matter for the Caribbean? So transport is both our Achilles heel and it's also our greatest opportunity. It accounts for close to 1/3 of fossil fuels use in the region and its emissions across many CARICOM member states. And left unchanged, it locks us into vulnerability, volatile oil prices, rising emissions, and mounting climate risks. So electrification and electrifying our transportation sector is really a triple win. Firstly, it's a climate win, cutting emissions and aligning with the Paris Agreement. It's an economic win. It makes good sense, reducing the cost for costly fuel imports and keeping capital circulations within our economies. And it's a social win, as in it helps to improve air quality, it reduces noise pollution, and it just ensures a cleaner, more reliable mobility for our citizens and a better environment. So for our small island developing states, the stakes are even higher. Every fuel shipment that we are able to displace, every charging station that we're able to install, and every electrical bus that we're able to deploy across the region increases our energy sovereignty and strengthens our resilience to external shocks. This is very important to note. And this is why e-mobility is not a luxury or an experiment. It is an essential transformation for the region's sustainable future. So to set the strategic context, under the NDC Tech project funded by GIZ, CCREEE is leading targeted technology demonstration pilots to show what e-mobility can look like and effectively what we can put into practice. In Grenada, we are working with the Coast Guard, the Marine Protection Agencies, and the fisherfolk on electrical and electrifying vessels. In Jamaica, we are supplying electric buses to national tertiary institutions. And in St. Lucia, we are supporting the replacement of public sector vehicles, including those in the postal service, those in the police forces, and those for water utilities. So while further lessons will emerge from these pilots in 2026, the early experience is already teaching us about the financial, the technical, and the institutional realities of rolling out EVs in small island contexts. And looking forward, a regional electric vehicle strategy will provide a clear North Star built on electrification, innovation, and intelligence. It's not just about technology adoption, but about building integrated systems that can scale. So going forward, these priorities stand out. Firstly, financing at scale, moving beyond pilot projects to secure innovative financing that will bring EVs into the mainstream. Interoperability and standardization, so ensuring that our charging systems, our grid integration, and data frameworks work seamlessly across borders, reducing costs and encouraging investments. Facilitating structured knowledge exchange, and we thank the University of the West Indies for being a leader in this, and UWI Mona over decades for their support. Creating systematic channels for policymakers, utilities, fleet managers, financiers, and civil society to share lessons in real time that go beyond ad hoc sharing and capacity and skills building. Developing a new cadre of Caribbean engineers, technicians, and policy specialists who can design, maintain, and govern this transition. CCREEE is working with governments, our developmental partners like the GIZ and the private sector. I will continue to position e-mobility as a catalyst for broader sustainable energy transformation, from renewables integrations to smart grids and digital mobility services. The question before us is not whether we will electrify transport, but how quickly and cohesively we can act to secure the benefits for every citizen, the utility, and the economy in the Caribbean. So in closing, I thank our partners, University of the West Indies, the Mona campus, for co-hosting, our colleagues at GIZ for the wonderful funding provided as they continue to be a major developmental partner for the region, advocating for significant and impactful change, and all participants for joining us today in this important discussion. Let us use this opportunity to move from pilots to incentives to scalable, interoperable, and sustainable e-mobility systems across the region. CCREEE remains committed to working with you to ensure that our transport future is low carbon, resilient, and people-centered. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those comments, Sir Nagdi. They are appreciated. And we're gonna invite Ms. Ina Divisa, Head of Program NDC Tech, to bring her greetings.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Excellent. I will keep it very short because I'm sure everyone is very eager to hear from the practitioners that are coming up. My thanks goes to Professor Stephenson and her team, all of the UWI, for all the work that they're doing under the NDC Tech program, as well as Mohammed Naqvi and all the team of the CCREEE doing their excellent work under the program. We're very happy to see this going forward. We see that to combat climate change, we need to see changes in the transport sector as well, and electric vehicles being one of the measures that we can take to make sure that we reduce emissions from the transport sector. Of course, building capacities in the region is essential. We want to give trust to both the car brands, the car suppliers, to deliver their cars to the islands, which hasn't been easy and isn't always easy, we know that, but also to customers, of course. We want them to make sure that they feel comfortable buying electric vehicles. So I think that building capacities in the regions is essential, and we're happy to see this webinar series kicking off. So I would say, with much further ado, without more further ado, I hand back to you, Professor Stephenson.
Thank you so much, Ina. And again, we appreciate the support from IKI and GIZ. Thank you so much. Colleagues, we're going to move to our presentations. Now, we're here to track momentum and assess our progress as a region and within individual countries in relation to EV adoption. And so we're also going to look at not just the region and just what's happening in individual islands. We want to look a little more closely at some case studies. And so you'll hear a little more about Barbados, and you're going to hear what is happening in Costa Rica, so that we can look at some lessons that can be learned. Colleagues, this afternoon we have two presenters. Now, we received apologies from Ms. Linda Holder from the Barbados Transport Board, who is unable to join us due to illness, and we wish for her a speedy recovery. However, our first speaker will cover some of the information around Barbados that Ms. Holder would have shared with us. Here's how we will proceed, colleagues. Our presenters will speak for 20 minutes, and then we'll add an additional 10 minutes for Sir Buckle to cover some of the information around the Barbados case study. After that presentation, we'll allow 5 minutes of questions and answers. And then to obtain the feedback from you, we're going to invite you to either type in the chat, or at the end of each presentation, we will yield the floor. Through raised hands and we identifying you, we will yield the floor to you. We just ask you, sweet colleagues, to make the interventions as targeted as possible, so as many of us can contribute to the discussion. And then we'll move to our closing remarks. Colleagues, our first presentation looks at EV adoption across the region, regional and national overview. It's going to be given by Sir Giovanni Buckle from CCREEE. Sir Giovanni, you can begin sharing your slides in the meantime. Mr. Buckle is a project manager and engineer at CCREEE. He has expertise in renewable energy systems, power system planning, and electric mobility, and leads multi-stakeholder projects that advance the region's transition to clean and resilient energy. Now, his work spans IRPs, integrated resource and resilient plans, generation expansion planning, and the NDC Tech project, where he leads e-mobility initiatives focused on introducing electric vehicles and charging infrastructure through technology pilots across the region. He holds a BSc with honors in electrical power engineering from the University of the West Indies, and is certified in project management for development. Colleagues, Sir Buckle.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Are you hearing me clearly?
We are hearing you well, Sir Buckle.
All right, perfect. And you're also seeing the presentation?
We are seeing Sir Buckle.
Fantastic. 1 second. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today's meeting. As mentioned from before, my name is Giovanni Bocco, Project Manager and Engineer at the CCREEE, and we will be looking at an overview of the region as it relates to our EV adoption. And I will share this agenda right here. Essentially, we'll be looking at the overview of the region, the challenges that we're facing, opportunities to accelerate the transition, and then a case study, as mentioned from before, of Barbados and their e-mobility transition. That being said, we will start off this presentation looking at the overview of what. Oops, I'm so sorry. Of the what has happened in the region as it relates to the transport sector. So I'll start first. I've highlighted 4 major activities from the region side. So firstly, in 2013, through the creation of the CARICOM energy policy, it would have laid out different goals, different targets for the energy sector, which includes both generation as well as the transportation sector, both of which will be, from a regional perspective, is very heavy as it relates to fossil fuel usage. Next is in 2015 was the creation of the Caribbean Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy, the CSAMS report. This report is essentially, it was a stock take of the region, what we have in terms of renewable energy, what we want to achieve as it relates to the climate change goals and the sustainable energy goals that we have set for ourselves. In that document, it was noted that if we were to transition to hybrid electric vehicles as well as electric vehicles, we could see a reduction in fossil fuel consumption by 47% or 73% respectively. Very high consumption reduction, especially considering the transport sector factors about 30% of the region's fossil fuel consumption. Following that was the establishment of the Electric Vehicle Working Group, the EVWG. Essentially, this group was created to share knowledge across the region to support each individual CARICOM country as we transition towards more sustainable energy sector. And then following that was the establishment of the Regional Electric Vehicle Strategy, the REVS report. Essentially, this is a framework created for e-mobility across the region, and it's supposed to support national EV policy development using the lessons learned taken from the EV group, as well as CARICOM Energy, and feeding all of this together into one report, essentially guiding this transition. That being said, as mentioned from before, there were targets set in terms of renewable of fossil fuel and greenhouse gas reduction. How do we quantify? How do we track the progress that we have across the region? I'll start by using the CARICOM Energy Report Card, the ERCs. This is an annual report that is created by the CCREEE. It's a data-driven process where we go into each individual island through hiring interns and collect data, all data related to the energy sector, which also includes generation as well as the transportation side of things. It's a very great report in terms of capturing where we in the region so that we can do tracking. And as I mentioned from before, it's an annual report. So it gets updated every year through the use of these interns. That being said, what have we seen from the region? Well, this is a graph taken and extracted from the ERC. This is actually taken from the 2021 ERC, which is now backdated. However, it was the best and the most comprehensive data set of data as it relates to EVs within the region, which highlights a challenge already, which we will go and speak about later on. But important to note in this slide is a total conventional vehicles at 1.3 million and a total for electric and hybrid vehicles, which is only at 1,600 vehicles across the region, right? A very far distance to go as if we are trying to go to 100% sustainable energy in the transport sector. That being said, this is a breakdown of what you would have been seeing inside that graph. Just so you can easily identify, and what you're noticing immediately, Barbados is leading the race with the most electric vehicles at 664 electric vehicles in the country, with the rest of the region relatively low in terms of adoption levels. And it's an issue that we're seeing in terms of not only the low adoption, but in terms of the actual data that we can collect, the actual data that we can share. Some of the countries, as you're seeing here, we were not able to collect data from them because there would have been either poor data collection or the data is just simply not available. A challenge that we will go and speak on next. That being said, what I would have done is bundle and group the challenges that we're seeing on a region-wide basis as it relates to EV adoption. Firstly, with the policy, and we're finding across the region, a lot of countries don't have a comprehensive EV policy document. Right, this EV policy document is supposed to outline the incentives for EV and all other related plans to support the development and the expansion of EVs across the region. And as I mentioned from before, there's a limited or a lack of data just in general. This ties straight into the economic challenges, which I think that we can all appreciate. The high upfront costs of EVs is certainly a barrier that we're seeing that's affecting the adoption of it, of these vehicles, with high import duties and taxes further constraining that issue. And then following that, as it relates to the economic side of things, it requires investment in the infrastructure that's going to support these electric vehicles because they have grid infrastructure challenges. That being said, going straight into the technical challenges that we're seeing, there's a lack of skilled technicians across the region. This is region-wide with, and these technicians are mechanics. These are the first responders. We're seeing that across the region, we don't have skilled personnel in place to not only do the standard maintenance of the vehicles, but as I had said, the first responders, the firefighters who are coming, if there's accidents, if there's emergencies with electric vehicles, they also need to understand how to approach them because it is fundamentally different from ICE vehicles, internal combustion engines, which is a gasoline and diesel vehicles. That being said, from the general and public perspective, it is something that is oftentimes overlooked, which is the readiness for the grid to manage demand or the increase in demand due to electric vehicles. You come home from work or school and you charge your vehicles. That charging, that demand is tied and has to be factored and accounted for by the utility because without it, it will lead to instability with the grid. And the worst thing you want is a grid that is not working effectively. Naturally, an additional technical challenge that we're seeing is that there's a limited charging infrastructure, which leads directly into the next challenge that we're seeing, which is the social. This includes range anxiety, which is one of the major issues that we're seeing. Range anxiety is essentially, if I have an electric vehicle, I am unsure if this vehicle itself will be able to manage the typical day-to-day routines that happens across different countries, and low public awareness, which ties directly into that range anxiety. Oftentimes, people are understandably anxious that the vehicles cannot traverse the daily requirements for them. But generally speaking, across the region, because we are small in terms of the global scale, generally speaking, if a vehicle is charged overnight, it's unlikely that this vehicle will not be able to carry out and do exactly what we would have needed. Typically, we're seeing that is a challenge in terms of public awareness. And then compounding that challenge is the failure of early EV entries into the market, which we would have seen vehicles 10 or over 10 years ago, when they would have been introduced within the region because of the climate, the heat, and so on. We're finding that the batteries themselves were not as great as nowadays, where there's several technological advancements that would have happened that not only make the EVs more efficient, but also much cheaper in the long term. Lastly is the market, challenges that we're finding in the market, which is supply chain challenges. Typically, and a lot of this is coming from COVID, which would have naturally had the supply chain issues straight across the globe. We're finding that within the region, that is also a challenge in terms of getting the vehicles landed into each country. That being said, how can we accelerate this transition? What are the opportunities that exist so that we can move and achieve our sustainable energy targets? I've characterized them into 4. These are essentially the major key levers that are needed to drive early EV adoption. Firstly, what we're seeing across the region is an emergence of EV policies in terms of governments and ministers prioritizing EVs and understanding that without the proper economic incentives and the proper policies in place, the adoption levels for EV is quite slow, as we would have seen in the data that would have represented from before. We're seeing that there are ongoing conversations about financing and partnerships across the region, which directly translate into number 3, which is pilot and demonstration projects, essentially looking at demonstrating the viability of electric vehicles across the region in terms of the data that we're collecting. We're finding that the data that we're collecting is going to be extremely crucial as we transition, as we share this data to support the transition. Lastly, and it's a point that I will speak about at the end, is interoperability and standards, which looks at having one standard for vehicles or signaling a standard for the uses of these, and I will touch on this in the next slides. That being said, as I mentioned from before, there are pilot projects that are happening in the region, and I wanted to highlight the NDC Tech. Naturally, this is a project that is that we are working on at the moment. As mentioned from our executive director, these pilots that we're doing in St. Lucia, we are replacing the government vehicles with electric vehicles. In Jamaica, we are giving the tertiary institutions in Jamaica electric buses, and then in Grenada we are replacing and retrofitting the vessels, the boats in Grenada with electric vessels for their coastal guard, their fisherfolk, as well as their marine protected agency. Essentially, this is a data-driven project, as I had mentioned from before, and what we will be doing is taking all the lessons learned from these pilots and sharing it across the region, because we're finding that not only is the perception and or the lack of understanding of EVs affecting the private sector, the actual consumers, the residential consumers, but in terms of insurance, not understanding electric vehicles themselves, and we have seen in the region where they either over compensating for the insurance, which almost erode any form of savings that could have been received due to policies that would have been in place as it relates to duty and concessions. So next, I want to speak about interoperability. What is interoperability? Simply put, it's being able to not have to worry about going to a gas station. I'll use the typical standard right now. You go to a gas station, you are and have no clue, you don't care about the actual connector from the gas station to put gas in your car. You go and you don't think about it. It's a challenge, and that's due to interoperability. No matter where you go, at different locations, you are 100% sure that I don't have to check. My vehicle will be able to get gas from this gas station. It's a similar approach that we have to take as it relates to electric vehicles, because there's several things that we need to consider. Firstly, as I had mentioned from before, the charging infrastructure. On the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a snippet of the different connector types for the charging for different electric vehicles. And as you've seen, it's based off of the location. So in the USA, their standards are different from Europe versus China versus Japan. Tesla also has different connector types, whether it's AC or DC. We're finding that there's several different connectors. This is a major challenge because it ties into all of the different barriers that we would have seen from before, which is range anxiety, because even if there are sufficient charging stations on island, there's no guarantee that this charging station has the right connector for my specific car. So what we're doing, and this is something that we're undertaking underneath the NDC Tech project, is the establishment of a interoperability report, essentially signaling to CARICOM that this is likely the best approach that we believe as it relates to interoperability. This is a standard that we want to do, and this report will cater to the charging infrastructure, the payment systems, the availability and the access of charging, the regulatory frameworks that will support this transition, and then lastly, the data and communication standards, because that is one of the largest challenges that we're finding from EV adoption. This being said, all of these things need to be looked at from a holistic point of view when the policymakers are creating the regulatory framework to support EVs. And I'll demonstrate this by looking at the case study of Barbados. As mentioned from before, Barbados is leading the race in terms of the sheer number of electric vehicles that are on island, with over 650 electric vehicles, with 86 electric buses are part of their public transportation fleet, which is paired by 100 or more than 100, I should say, EV charging stations. These figures, and to get to this level, it was not an accident. This was very purposeful from the ministry in Barbados through the establishment of two main documents. The Barbados National Energy Policy, which speaks heavily to what the plan for Barbados will be as it relates to electric vehicles, as well as the Renewable Energy Fiscal Incentives booklet. Coming from these two documents, I've extracted essentially tying the barriers that I would have mentioned from before, the challenges, the class for them, and looking at what Barbados would have done in their national energy policy. As I had mentioned from before, it was a holistic assessment. So coming from that document, in that document, the policy itself was a comprehensive one because it had mentioned the EV incentives, but it went further and much more detailed into each area following that. So under the economic class, it looked at reducing duties for imported EVs, which I will show later. It looked at encouraging the local dealers to participate in the EV market through concessions. And these concessions included training the actual mechanics that work. So this is an incentive mechanism that Barbados would have introduced, such that the dealerships themselves, if their technicians were trained in EVs and how to work on them, then they would have been provided concessions. And then lastly, in the actual policy document, it would have identified the need to look at international funding to support this transition, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Next, as it relates to how they went on tackle the actual technical expertise, the technical capacity within Barbados. As I had mentioned from before, the plan is to enable the local skill force to provide effective EV maintenance. And as I had mentioned in the point before, they would have used economic incentives to get that public and private sector buy-in. Lastly, which I think was very interesting, was they were very intentional about where the charging locations would have been set, strategically placed such that it will enable the consumers to be very comfortable with where they are. So this would have looked at installing charging stations right beside gas stations themselves, or even at looking at supermarkets. So there are several charging stations that are supermarkets because you're going to be there for a bit of time. It's a perfect opportunity for you to charge your electric vehicles. And it's this strategic and a holistic approach that would have helped Barbados get to where they are at the moment. Next, which is the social/cultural aspect of it. Barbados would have determined that it would be crucial to the success of this transition to include alternative or electric vehicles into the public transportation sector, and which I will be touching on in a bit more detail later on. That being said, continuing for this, what did those incentive mechanisms look like? So if you're looking at the electric vehicles versus the ICE vehicles are internal combustion engines, the gas and diesel engines. If you're looking at the difference between the duty rates, the import duty is 10% for electric vehicles versus 30 to 45% for ICE. 0% VAT, and this is something that the government would have extended actually until 2026. Electric vehicles importation is exempt from excise tax and road tax for the first 5 years of their usage. And then also there's tax depreciation at 50% per year, 50% of the standard depreciation, that is. So in their policy documents, in their renewable energy fiscal incentives booklet, Barbados would have done a holistic approach to attack each individual aspect of this transition, what it requires, obviously with the economic incentives going to be some of the biggest drivers as with respect to EVs. That being said, as mentioned from before, they had targeted their public transportation sector understanding that with a heavy rollout of these electric buses, it would result in greater and broader public awareness of the buses, of electric vehicles themselves. And it led to this pilot, or I should say the development of the electrification of their public transportation fleet. Right, Barbados, as I had mentioned from before, has 86 electric buses currently in their fleet. This is as of 2025. To get to there, it was not easy. They had several challenges. The first buses of which would have landed in 2020, which is in the middle of COVID. So as you can imagine, that would have led to several challenges, but I will touch on them on an individual basis. That being said, the first and one of the biggest challenges that they would have faced is the grid infrastructure challenges. Naturally, buses require much more demand, much more energy to charge their batteries. So their Barbados Transport Authority would have been in close collaboration, close coordination with the Barbados Light and Power. This is the utility company here. To understand the implications of the grid impact that would be coming from charging, because these electric buses themselves are currently fully supported, fully charged by the utility and not through renewables at the moment. That being said, the next challenges that they would have faced would have been under the supply chain and the logistics issues, as I had mentioned from before. This project would have initiated during COVID, so they would have seen significant delays in terms of the importation of the buses, as well as the parts for maintenance. And because EVs are new and emerging, there's still a lot of changes that happen every day, a lot of technological advancements. So the plan is, and it is something that has continued on to today, is that there's continuous training such that the local capacity in Barbados is prepared and to understand what is required for this change in technology. Next is the skills and training. The local team had no experience with EVs at all, especially the actual project team. They had also no experience with grid connection or anything along those lines, which would have been a new territory for them. So this, along with training for the buses themselves, was required. Training how to use it, understand what the difference in uses between normal, or I should say traditional diesel and gas buses to electric buses. There was training that was required. This training was delivered from a Chinese company, and there were time zone barriers, so a lot of the training would have taken place at 7 p.m. Barbados time, and the trainings would last 4+ hours. So it's a understanding of what has happened, and these are the challenges that they would have faced. That being said, next was the cultural and change management. The staff themselves would have needed to understand the uses of the buses and to be comfortable that this transition is a positive one, naturally. And we find across the region that change oftentimes gets a lot of pushback, but it would have been interesting to know that the Barbados Transport Authority would have had to put a lot of effort in terms of building the capacity of their staff, but also going and doing public outreach. And then naturally, because this pilot project was coming during the COVID era, there's a lot of concerns that were raised in terms of bringing sealed air-conditioned buses, as it would, raise health fears and so on. It's natural, but the thing is, understanding the change and the propensity of people to not welcome change oftentimes would have led to a lot of negative feedback. That's not something that you want, especially with something that's new as an emerging. So it required a lot of outreach to the different stakeholder groups. That being said, it was definitely not all negative. There were several successes and lessons learned coming from these projects. As I had mentioned from before, starting in 2020, they would have procured 33 buses. And in these procurements and in these first stages, they would have required a lot of training, and the educational impact was long lasting because the people who were trained, which would have included not only the mechanics, but also drivers and mechanics, but also the first responders, the ambulance, the fire force, the police, all of which would have had to come into training. They would have built institutional capacity within Barbados, which is a long lasting. Naturally, in the contracts that they would have arranged, there would have been knowledge transfer requirements, which would have overall supported this capacity building within the region. Next was the environmental and economic impact, which is extremely important as it relates to the greenhouse gas emissions. They would have, the University of the West Indies, Barbados would have done a lot of monitoring of the actual buses themselves and tracking the greenhouse gas emissions, which were verified to be reduced throughout the testing of these buses. And following that immediately, the Barbados Transport Authority was also seeing economic savings. Obviously, savings as it relates to diesel spending because the fleet has been transitioned to electric buses, but you're also seeing even if you do factor in the cost for electricity usage, the overall savings or the overall expenditure resulted in positive savings for the Barbados Transport Authority. That being said, because it's a customer service company, they would have noted several improvements in terms of the customer satisfaction with the buses fitted with Wi-Fi, as well as catering towards wheelchair persons that need. Every single bus that was procured has at least space for one wheelchair ramp with several supporting technology to overall improve the customer satisfaction. Lastly, and what is going to be most important, and this is exactly what we're seeing, Barbados is currently the leader of the region as it relates to e-mobility. All the lessons learned that would have come from this, not only this project, but the further expansion coming from the 33 in 2020 to the 86 buses. Now, this is a significant amount. This is trending directly towards 100% of their fleet, which is total to about 100 buses. So they're quite close to having a full fleet that's electrified. That being said, the next steps that they would have been highlighted is the inclusion of renewable energy technology. Naturally, with the goal of greening the entire transport sector, the Barbados Transport Authority is looking to power and charge their buses through the use of renewable energy sources, with solar PV being the likely candidate for that. That being said, they are not stopping here. They're at 86 and they're going for 100%. A lot of the buses that exist, or I should say some of the buses that remain that are traditional ICE engines, are quite old, some from the 1990s. They're becoming quite obsolete, even as it relates to maintenance and trying to find parts for those. So they're finding that what's required now is to continue this. They do not plan on stopping, which I think is very ambitious and is setting the tone for the region in terms of what is required for electrifying the public sector. And then last is using the lessons learned, using the real savings to strengthen the policy, strengthen laws, and enable the working force to be able to support this transition in terms of all aspects. So looking at the drivers, maintenance, and all first responders. And then this will naturally expand the jobs within the EV market, because it not only stops at the maintenance, but the buses themselves would use fiberglass. So there's opportunities that they were seeing where people were working on this glass replacement, AC maintenance, Wi-Fi and the camera systems that are fitted within each of the buses, all of which will need someone to work on them. So we're finding that there was a lot of holistically positives being taken from Barbados and their electrification of their public transportation fleet. With that being said, I will stop now. That is the end of my presentation. So I just want to say thank you and pause for any questions.
Thank you so much, Sir Giovanni. Beautiful presentation. Giovanni, I see Marsha's hand up. I'm going to yield the floor. Marsha, you want to go ahead?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Thank you so much, Giovanni, for that
Afternoon.
very insightful presentation. Just to say a couple of things. One, I think it must be said that in terms of Barbados's EV uptake, it has largely been driven by the private sector, with one company in particular, that's Mega Power. and that is a female-led company, which is really unheard of, not only in the region, but across the world. So I give kudos to that organization for pushing as they have. Beyond that, in terms of the rollout of the charging stations, those are largely, again, driven by mega power. I do not think there are any government-owned or other charging stations that are owned by, say, for example, a service station, a conventional service station. They're largely rolled out by the same mega power. And what they've done is in association with having those public stations available, with each vehicle that they sell, they provide, in some instances, 2 chargers, one that you can deploy at the workplace, particularly for those government institutions that have EV vehicles, and another that can be deployed at the home. So that allows for that anxiety, that range anxiety, to be completely diminished. My question to you, I wanted for us to see an example of what the cost benefit analysis would be in terms of the day-to-day operation of an ICE vehicle versus an EV. I'm not sure if you have that information available to you.
Thank you so much. I don't have that information available to me, but I do know that when they would have been doing their assessment overall, and this is not only in terms of diesel or gas savings, but in terms of maintenance as well. I think what was communicated to me was that there was significant savings straight across the board. So I think that I don't have the actual figures, but this was what was communicated to me. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Marsha. Thank you, Gio. Ms. Daniel, if you could get ready to just open your microphone and give a quick question for the ones that you're posing in the chat. We'll allow you one of them. Sir Owen, could you go ahead?
Yes, good afternoon, fellow participant. Just to answer Marsha's question, I have owned an EV for 2 years. In fact, I own 2 of them. And in terms of maintenance, I've had no maintenance on my 2 EVs. So I mean, I don't buy gas. I don't. The question of the range anxiety for Jamaica is a bigger country than Barbados. So my range is probably 240 kilometers. So naturally, if I drive from Kingston to Montego Bay, I have to recharge in Montego Bay to come back to Kingston. But the real question I want to ask is, when they're in these countries, in the EC countries, there are laws that prevent persons from self-generating their own power. Whatever I know, for example, in Grenada, whatever they produce, they have to sell to the utility and then buy it back. It's different in Jamaica, where you can self-generate and use all the power you want, but it is different in the smaller islands. When will these laws be changed so that people will realize the full benefit of EVs? Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Owen, very much for that. What you're saying is precisely what's important to understand. Each jurisdiction has their different challenges. It's organized and structured differently. But generally speaking, it's the role of the utility, not the utility, but the role of the policymakers to really help this transition. It has to be a holistic approach, similar to what Barbados would have done. Their energy policy revision and the subsequent following incentives and so on, it was done through everybody being on the same page. This would include the ministry, the utility, the regulator. Everybody needs to be on the same page to achieve these goals, because as you're rightfully saying, if you say, if you take away the tariffs on importation of EVs, but then the insurance companies, as I was trying to mention from before, EVs are high risk to them. And because they're high risk, because they don't aware or they're not aware of the actual usage and so on, it would lead to, and this is an actual example in St. Lucia, this has happened from before, where some companies, the insurance and that you have to pay completely erodes the saving these tax exemptions. So it's important that everybody is on the same table, understanding what is required for this transition so that everybody can plan effectively. Thanks.
Daniel, you have the last question as we move to Sir Arturo.
Thank you, Dr.
And,
Steele.
and forgive me, colleague, if you could just introduce yourself, name and institution would help the colleagues who are listening in.
Sure. Danielle Evanson, CCREEE, KFIL, and the Roots to Reefs program with the Prime Minister's office in Barbados. So my question, I think that's the first one. Is there active discussion happening between whoever is leading the introduction of the EVs and the utilities in terms of addressing those issues that will come up when the penetration gets much higher, addressing it at an early stage?
Right. So it depends on the country that we're looking at, but as you're rightfully saying, it's something that's absolutely crucial. And I think that through these initiatives, through these webinars, through other engagements across the region, I think it's something that's now getting more appreciation from the ministerial side, that they understand that it requires, as I had mentioned from before, that holistic approach. Everybody's on the same table, understanding exactly what we want to achieve, so that all considerations can be put on the table when these policy documents are being made. We're finding that even within the NDC tech, one output of it is to support the national determined contributions and the commitments that each nation has. When you're doing this type of process, it will raise up these same concerns that you're speaking about, and this is something that's ongoing across the region. So as you rightfully raised, this is something that needs to be done and is currently being done. As I said, this with the caveat that this is not all Caribbean countries, but some of them who are in the process of updating their documents, this is something that they're definitely considering.
Again, colleagues, we're going to thank Sir Giovanni Buckle for his presentation. So Giovanni, there are some questions in the chat. I'm going to see if you can just address them in the chat while we give Sir Arturo the floor. And I have
No
one.
problem.
What are we going to do about the data collection? But we'll have to talk about that in the future. Sir Arturo is an environmental engineer with an MSc in transport planning and the environment from Newcastle University. He specializes in sustainable mobility, electric transport, and urban transport planning. Over the past decade, he has worked on with a number of international organizations, including UNEP, JEF, SLOCAT, JICA, and CRUSA, supporting the design and implementation of projects focused on e-mobility, sustainable urban transport, and climate policy in Latin America and the Caribbean. He has advised national and local governments and coordinated technical efforts related to Costa Rica's national decarbonization plan. Arturo currently serves as a Sustainable Mobility Coordinator at the Center for Urban Sustainability and a project manager and e-mobility country specialist for the JEF7 project, accelerating the transition to electric public transport in Costa Rica's greater metropolitan area. He's passionate about advancing equitable low-emission mobility systems to reduce environmental impacts, increase quality of life, and promote more sustainable and inclusive cities. Colleagues, please welcome Sir Arturo. You have the floor, sir. Please share your slides. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Stephenson, and thank you everyone for the participation and for the invite for me to comment on the Costa Rican case, and specifically the project, the JEF project that is going around which finished in July during this year. Let me know if the slides are already
Slides are
full
up.
screen.
We
Perfect.
see. Thank you so much.
So today I'm going to talk about a little bit on how we did this project with the taxi sector within our international airport, our main international airport, which is the Juan Santa Maria. This project was based on, as Ms. Stephenson mentioned, the National Decarbonization Plan and the National it would be the National Electric Transport Plan, which is the main policy that we have regarding EVs or more sustainable vehicles in general. So this is a direct result of that planning. And I'm going to talk about how we engaged with the people. If you need more background on how did Costa Rica get where it is right now, it's an interesting thing. Since 2018, we published a national EV incentives and promotion law, which really changed how the whole market behaved around EVs. We gave incentives, fiscal incentives and non-fiscal incentives, but the fiscal incentives were the ones that did the trick in the end, which was to basically to exempt EVs from only EVs, not necessarily hybrid electric vehicles or plug-in vehicles. Anything that had an internal combustion engine inside the vehicle did not qualify for the incentives being promoted through this law, which was a big change in regards to other EV incentives law around the world, which normally contemplate at least plug-in hybrid vehicles. In Costa Rica, then, since 2018, we've managed to basically double the number of EVs that are in on our yearly sales on a yearly basis. So it has been growing quite fast. In 2018, I believe we had around 600 electric vehicles, which a lot of them were golf carts, which qualified at least or were registered for the country. But since the EV law, we had a massive adoption of light duty vehicles in general, which we are now around in total. Let me see. We have almost 22,000 EVs, battery electric EVs in our fleet for light duty vehicles, and around 29,000 or 30,000 EVs in total. Still, public transport has been a challenge, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. But one of the things that I was setting the context for is for this public transport, which was the main scope for the JEF7 project, which is called Accelerating the Transition to Electric Public Transport in the Greater Metropolitan Area of Costa Rica. The project, its main component or its main demonstration was to have 6 electric vehicles monitored during a whole year of operation, which was between October 2023 to October 2024. The vehicles were the Ion S 2023 model, which is a Chinese vehicle, and it was selected by the operators, the taxi operators themselves, through a screening that we did for the market on which options were available for them and which options qualified for public transport vehicles in the sense of taxi vehicles for the airport. And this was important because every year the market in Costa Rica changes a lot in terms of new models coming in. By the time that we were doing the screening in 2022, 2023, we had very few models that were available to be taxis in Costa Rica. We ended up discarding, we ended up screening around 60 models by then, but only 4 of them were apt to be electric taxis for the airport. So that made a quite difficult decision for the operators, since the 4 vehicles that were available, some of them didn't have enough trunk space, which was important since we were talking about electric vehicles in the airport services. Then other ones were too expensive for what they were, let's say, what was available or what was acceptable for the taxi operators in the airport. So we ended up selecting this model, which was not necessarily dealt through, let's say, a dealership or an established network from the manufacturer, but this were imported through a different company. It was I would say a commercializer and not necessarily a dealership, because they didn't have representation for the brand from the automaker in China. So this was another interesting thing. It was a company just bringing in different types of electric vehicles from China, in our case, and then selling them here, normally for a much lower price than you would find from new car dealerships in Costa Rica. So this was one of those particularities that our case had. Besides the 6 electric taxis, we also initially, for the pilot project, installed 6 charging points, which were 7 kilowatts, which was the power that was available, or the chargers that were available at that time, which is, again, important to notice, since this also changes on a year-to-year basis. Now a 7 kilowatt charger is not necessarily something that anyone would buy, besides having a let's say a house charger. But now we also have 28 kilowatt chargers or 21 kilowatt chargers, which clearly reduce the charging times significantly, and especially for a work vehicle like taxis are, which was important for them to have as little charging time as possible, again, within the budget that we had for the project. So initially we had this, and I'm going to comment a little bit more at the end of the presentation on what we did after we monitored the vehicles, after we had the results, and how we adjusted our project based on those results. We also had, besides the 6 electric vehicles, we also monitored 6 internal combustion engine vehicles to be able to compare the results that we were obtaining. We had 4 automobiles or 4 sedan vehicles monitored. The 6 electric vehicles that we had were sedan also, but we also went a little bit further and started monitoring minibuses. The airport taxi fleet is composed of minibuses, sedan vehicles, and vehicles adapted for people with reduced mobility as well. So in the end, we monitored those 2 minibuses in case new options became available in the market, which they did after the project was finalized. And now we're having a couple more models for minibuses, which eventually I would think will be represented in the airport taxi fleet. And through all this process, we had up to 140 people, taxi operators and public institutions that participated during the capacity building activities. One of the things we did from the start was to create a communication strategy for the taxi operators or taxi concessionaires, which, let's say, taxi operators are I mean the owners of the vehicles, but also the drivers of the vehicles, because not necessarily the person that owns the taxi is the one that is driving it, since they can hire more people or they can delegate their operation to other people, for example. And we can do those kind of, let's say, our legislation allows for that kind of practices within or organization within the taxi concessionaires. The other objective for this communication strategy was to build trust. In the end, we had to demonstrate that the vehicles that we selected were able to manage the operations of the taxis without further accommodations. In the end, we wanted to have at least one charge for the whole day. That was the ideal. And we had to understand their operations, which they didn't really have that clear. They estimated that they were driving a little bit more than what they were really driving. And since they are airport services, they can have really short trips or really long trips. For example, 200, 300-kilometer trips when they go from the airport to the beaches, or when they go from the airport to the mountain areas, or the more touristic places. So that was another important part of the selection of airport taxis during the design of the project. We wanted to get the most demanding vehicles operating, being monitored, in order to be able to electrify them and to set a strategy for the future. And again, communication strategies need to have feedback loops, and those feedback loops are really important because in the end, they are the ones on the ground operating the vehicles on a daily basis, and they know better than most of us on how things operate and what they need on a daily basis. So that was important through this communication strategy, which again had technical support for emergencies. They had WhatsApp chats to be able to sort out questions that the drivers had late at night, or if a charger was down, how to report it with the utility. All those kind of things were support that the consulting team provided for the drivers and the concessionaires during the implementation of the project. We had structured training sessions such as this ones, where we gave them knowledge on how to best operate the vehicles, which kind of maintenance practices were the best for the vehicles, and all those kind of things regarding a new technology for them. In the end, they had never had an opportunity to drive an electric vehicle, so they had lots of questions regarding the operation. Then again, we had monitoring and follow-up, and we gave them monthly reports on how the vehicle was performing, but also how drivers were behaving with the vehicle. For example, we were monitoring speeds, we were monitoring acceleration patterns, braking patterns, all those kind of things. We were able to give feedback to the taxi concessionaires and to the drivers in order to optimize the use of the electric vehicles. And in the end, we also delivered or distributed some educational materials that we found pertinent for them to know. For example, locations of the chargers, how to use the chargers, different aspects regarding battery technology. All those kind of things were part of the information delivered to the taxi service in general. The channels, as I was mentioning, we were in direct communication, and especially the consulting team in charge. They had WhatsApp numbers, they were talking on a daily basis, and anything that they needed was sorted out as quickly as possible and reported to the relevant stakeholders as early as possible for them to be able to fix them, especially charging infrastructure. Charging infrastructure tends to fail still and not necessarily be repaired as early as people need it to be. And that's something that is important when scaling up, and especially in our case that we have a national fast charging network, but that fast charging network is falling short as we have a lot of the electric vehicles wanting to use them. And if one point fails, if one charging point fails or one charging station fails, then it becomes a problem for a lot of people. And you get to hear that a lot in the country. And there are reports that have been published lately in the last year and a half or in the last year, which basically show that charging infrastructure has become, let's say, a nuisance for some people using electric vehicles, since they are not dependable. Let's say you can't really, they're not trustworthy. You can get to the charging station, not know if it's operating or not. You don't have real-time information on that charging infrastructure, which is a need for people operating vehicles. And it happened a lot during the pilot project. People, they planned their trip. They said, okay, I will make it. I have enough charge to get from the airport to the final destination. There's a charger around. They got to the charger and the charger was down. And it was, I think, once or twice that people had to call tow trucks in order to get back to a charging point and basically get back to the airport. And of course, that time lost, which is money lost for the drivers and for the taxi operators. Again, we had the troubleshooting guide. If there were any problems, they had a what to do list of things that could go wrong. If it wasn't there, then they can talk to the supporting team or to the agency, the agency that delivered the vehicles, the commercialization agency, which wasn't really something that was made for or from the manufacturer, but they were the representative, or they were responsible for the vehicles they imported. We had in-person and digital communications and activities. We had workshops, focus groups. We had printed material, digital content, and different types of channels. And again, WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups, emails that we were distributing different materials to different stakeholders regarding the information that we were collecting through the pilot projects. Here you can see some of the activities. We have this, let's say, this infographics that were published late during the project, which in this case showed the charging stations around the country, the different charging or connectors that we had, how many charging stations belonged to which utility companies, how to use the electric vehicles, how to charge them, how to plug the charging point to the vehicle. All those kind of demonstrations were part of the project. And some of the key messages that I can say from this pilot project is that there's a, let's say, if it's a new sector that is testing the technology, they need to have that follow-up and they need to have that 24-hour support because it's something new for them. So anything that they don't know what it is, they will ask. And even if it's a relatively simple question for the technical teams, it could be a huge issue for the person that has no idea on how EVs work. So that's, or the public charging infrastructure works. So that's something that needs to happen, especially during the first few months. Then people learn, they teach each other, which was something that happened. For example, taxi drivers are not necessarily the people that stay in their jobs the most. So there's a high rotation, and whenever a new person came in, the other people that were involved in the project were the ones teaching them how to operate the vehicles and such. Then again, economic benefits, we did see that there were lower operating costs in terms of energy, especially that fuels in Costa Rica are not necessarily cheap when compared to other countries in the region. And we did see, let's say, a reduction of about 40 to 60% in energy costs just from the pilot project. Maintenance costs were included for the whole year of operation of the pilot project. So we didn't have to pay for any of those things. But from what we saw and from what we heard from the operators, if anything, they had to change the AC filters or tires in one case, I think we heard. That, putting aside any crashes that they might have been involved or any situations which happened with the vehicles, but on a purely technological side of the vehicle, there were really no maintenance needed for the 110,000 kilometers on average that the vehicles were during the operating year. And it's a lot for 1 year of operations. As you see, it's basically around 320 kilometers per day, which was crazy, basically, from what we saw. We were not expecting the vehicles to cover that much distance within a day, but in the end, they managed uh, to hold their ground when to internal combustion engine vehicles. Of course, what we were looking for were the reductions of emissions and the contribution to sustainability, but it goes beyond that. I think that's not necessarily as visible to a person as, for example, what taxi drivers told us. The sensation and the feeling of driving an electric vehicle was much more relaxed. They got back home feeling much better than they did with an internal combustion engine. They didn't have noise, they didn't have vibrations. It was smoother to drive than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So there were a lot of social benefits to operating electric vehicles within the taxi service. It became an icebreaker also with the people that they were driving to their different destinations. People were asking questions. So it made the trip for them and for the passengers much more relaxed than it would have been if it would have been with an with an internal combustion engine vehicle. So that made a difference for the drivers as well. The vehicle in the end held up. The autonomies or the range that the vehicles needed were suitable for their operations. So that was a plus. But again, they needed to know when they would be able to charge, and that if they went to a charger, it would be there available for them. Because if it wasn't, it meant that it would be a backlog of hours that they wouldn't be able to take another trip and not earn any money. So that was an adjustment that we had to make by the end of the project, that we had to install a fast charger in the airport exclusively for their use, in order to keep the drivers that we initially had, the 6 electric vehicles, but also to invite other drivers to make the change to an electric vehicle, since now they will be able to charge for sure in their waiting spots, and they will be able to cover the distances that they needed to cover. So that was part of the adjustments that we had to make, and one of those lessons learned. One of the things I would say is having face-to-face interactions. People value those opportunities to express themselves, to have questions, to even have answers that are relatively simple again, but that they need that face-to-face interaction. It builds trust again, and they have the direct experience, which is the second lesson learned. The testimonies and the experiences that they had dispelled myths that other drivers could have, and other drivers were awaiting for for the pilot project in order to make decisions or to take decisions if they wanted to switch to an EV or if they wanted to continue with an internal combustion engine vehicle. Again, the technical support provided by the teams, the consulting team, was incredible, and it was specialized. They had really a good connection with the taxi drivers, and the taxi drivers trusted them, which again made it much easier. And still to this day, they talk to the consulting team to know if there is anything they can do additionally from the project in order to support them. And we also had surveys and workshops to collect or have those feedback loops in order to make changes or adjustments to what we initially planned, because in the end, again, it's impossible to get it right from the start, and pilot projects are meant to give results and to make adjustments based on those results. So in the end, the project demonstrated that let's say the vehicles were suitable, the communication strategy was adequate for the public that we were working with, and there were different situations in which we could build trust with the drivers and with the taxi concessionaires. And there are now different ways in which this can scale up. We're waiting to see if new drivers will take electric vehicles as their choice whenever they have to renew their vehicles. They do have difficulties accessing finance because, again, taxi drivers are not necessarily in the Costa Rican market. People that have good practices, collecting information, keeping records, and also they difficulty accessing finance because they have loan or debts that haven't been paid regarding different aspects, not necessarily regarding the vehicle itself, but that limits their ability to access credit from traditional banking structures. The vehicles that we used during the pilot project had a co-finance part from the project, which were $13,000, which basically covered the cost difference between an EV and the internal combustion engine vehicles that they normally used, which were Toyota Yaris in our case, or Toyota Corollas, and that made them more attractive. So again, another thing that we found from, or another lesson learned from the project was that there needs to be some kind of support from the public sector, from the government, or from, for example, development banks, in order to lower or to allow for the participation or the access to finance for taxi drivers. And I would leave it there. If anything, you can check the reports. Sadly, they're all in Spanish, but thankfully now AI tools are, they have translating functions which are relatively good. So if you want to check any of the available reports, you can find them through that link in the presentation. And again, thank you very much for the invitation and for allowing me to share the experience of our project and the context in Costa Rica in general.
Thank you so much, Sir Arturo. It was really good hearing this pilot and learning from what your team and colleagues implemented. There was a question in the chat around data collection in relation to, you said you tracked EVs and tracked usage. Could you tell us a little more? The question was what tool was used, but if you can tell us a little more about the process.
Yeah. Yes, we scanned the available onboard diagnosis system in the vehicles, and then transmits the information to their own software, which was a platform to which we and the drivers and the taxi concessionaires had access to. All at the instantly, that you and they will monitor stops to where we're going, and that allowed us to install the 28 kilowatt chargers in communities that did not have fast chargers, or that they only had one fast charger. We had those 28 kilowatt chargers installed there in order to allow for faster charge for the taxis and for the rest of the population as well. But on communities that through the pilot.
Thank you, Arturo. Colleagues, do we have any more questions, comments? We're going to wrap up now, colleagues. Within 10 minutes, we will wrap up the session. Any questions, comments, colleagues? Arturo, love the fact that the team, as part of their approach, took time to sensitize the taxi drivers. That buy-in was crucial. I know you've presented the process, but I wondered if there was one thing you wanted us in the Caribbean, if we tried to replicate this kind of engagement with our taxi services, for example, what one thing would you say, keep an eye particularly on this?
Listen to them, I would say, because they do have more knowledge on their operations than we have, and that is key in order to design a solution for them and not a solution that we think will work for them. In the end, they need to be by them for them, some kind of way. So, and adjust. Things are not going to go right from the start. So adjust as quickly as possible. And again, yeah, data-driven decisions, which were what we did.
Beautiful. And love the support, the support throughout the day that was given in the project. Excellent work to you and the team. Thanks again for sharing with us. Colleagues, thank you so much. Colleagues, our last intervention is very short. It's just going to summarize our discussion, some key points we can take away. Is what we're going to do as we wrap up this session. And just allow me to hand over to Ms. Sharon Farquharson, Chief Technical Officer, CCREEE, just to wrap up this discussion for us. Sharon?
Thanks so much, Professor Stephenson, and thanks to our presenters, to Giovanni and Arturo, and to Linda in her absence, who did share content on what's happening here in Barbados. It has definitely been an informative and insightful afternoon. Thanks for everyone who was sharing, whether questions or comments in the chat and on the mic. I think you added to the richness of the perspectives that we were able to hear this afternoon. And what we have seen is that e-mobility in the Caribbean, thankfully, it's no longer theoretical. From the first vehicles being introduced in 2013 to where we are now, where there are countries like Barbados with more than 700 EVs on the road, but we're seeing the acceleration, the momentum happening in some of the countries. I know the question was asked in the chat about Jamaica, that was at around 100 in 2021. The 2024 figure is in excess of 300. So we are seeing where the policies, the fiscal incentives, the rolling out of charging infrastructure, where all of these things are coming together regionally to bridge those gaps that would limit progress. And so we are seeing where the momentum is happening on a regional level. In Barbados, there are several opportunities that we've seen emerge. The role of the private sector that they have played in ensuring that they play their part. Mega Power was mentioned in the discussion around what they have done with the public charging infrastructure, but also all of that was made possible through the policies and the regulations that were operationalized by the government so that those partnerships could actually happen. And then, of course, the social impact. We've seen that in the Barbados case study, in the Costa Rica case study, we're having those stakeholder engagements, making sure that the persons who are going to be driving the vehicles are sensitized, those who are going to be using the vehicles are sensitized and comfortable, and making sure that dialogue continues. And that last point by Arturo, definitely around listening to the stakeholders who are actually going to be using the vehicles so that we understand how they operate and that whatever is introduced enhances their operations and doesn't limit the way that they're actually able to operate. A few of the other key things that came out across the board was the reduction in maintenance and operational costs. around EVs, and that has come out in the 2 case studies as well as the personal anecdotes that persons would have shared. Just allow me to also recognize some of our utility colleagues are here. We definitely appreciate you being here because you are key to this electric vehicle rollout across the region. And also some of the members of the electric vehicle working group are here as well. Thank you for your support, for being here, from what you would have done when the REVS, the Regional Electric Vehicle Strategy, was being developed, to the support you continue to give today. And so as we build momentum, the regional data shows that adoption is underway, and now is the time to move from pilots to scale. Leverage national leadership. Barbados demonstrates how bold policy and strong financing partnerships can deliver real results, and we are grateful for the continued partnership with our development partners like the GIZ and the BMWK, and seize the cross-border opportunities that we can leverage the economies of scale and learn from each other, so that we can truly drive the momentum and we can ensure that the Caribbean's transport future is electric, resilient, and people-centered. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. There is, I forgot the word, Prof.
A survey.
Survey in the chat. Yes,
No
please
problem.
click on that link before you leave, so that we can get feedback on this webinar. And this is a series, so look out for the information on the other sessions that are going to be happening, whether in person, hybrid, or online, so that you can join us. Thank you.
And colleagues, we're going to take the questions you have put in the chat, and we're going to just, those that we have not answered, we will answer them and send them back out. They may very well come together towards an FAQ emerging from this activity around EVs within the Caribbean. So thank you again, colleagues. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Sir Arturo CCREEE. Thank you so much for leading this effort for us. GIZ, BMWE, thank you so much for the funding. Colleagues all, thank you for coming. Have a beautiful afternoon.